At the family's special dinner, the millionaire CEO made a point of humiliating his poor nephew, who worked as a waiter to survive. "You are a failure. You will never be anything," he shouted in front of everyone. Humiliation was the main course of the night. But suddenly, the family lawyer interrupted the dinner, bringing the will of the recently deceased patriarch. A deadly silence fell over the room. When the lawyer read aloud the name of the sole heir to the entire fortune and the leadership of the companies, the CEO's face turned pale. He had just... The air in the private dining room of New York's most exclusive restaurant was so thick you could cut it with the sterling silver knives that adorned the table. For the Harrison family, the annual dinner was less a celebration and more a reaffirmation of power, a stage where Richard, the eldest son and now CEO of the empire his father had built, could flaunt his authority. Every smile was rehearsed, every word carefully weighed. At the center of it all was Lucas, moving between the chairs with a dignity that contrasted painfully with his crisp waiter's uniform. He was Richard's nephew, a young man who dreamed of an architecture degree and who, to pay his tuition, served dinners to the elite of which, by blood, he was a part. The irony was cruel, and Richard made sure to accentuate it. It had been his suggestion that the restaurant assign Lucas to this specific table, a silent, vicious way of reminding him of his place. Lucas kept his posture straight, his gaze fixed on his work, avoiding the eyes of his aunts, uncles, and cousins. He could feel Richard's contempt like a physical weight on his shoulders, but he focused on the details. The temperature of the wine, the arrangement of the silverware, the precise angle to pour water without a sound. In his mind, he reviewed the costs of his next tuition payment. The rent on the small apartment he shared with a friend, the promise he'd made to his late mother that he would make something of himself. Every plate he served, every glass he filled, was a step toward that promise. The vast Harrison family fortune, which spanned countless businesses and financial investments, was a distant reality, a parallel universe to his daily struggle. He didn't want their fortune, only the respect he was denied. The tension peaked as he approached Richard to serve the exorbitantly priced French red wine. His hand, steady all night, trembled for a fraction of a second. Perhaps it was his uncle's cutting glare, or a word whispered by his aunt that sounded like an insult. A single, minuscule drop of crimson escaped the bottle and stained the white linen tablecloth beside the crystal glass. It was an insignificant error, almost invisible, but for Richard, it was the perfect excuse. He shot to his feet, the movement so abrupt that his heavy chair toppled backward with a dull thud. The sound echoed through the room, silencing the few remaining conversations. "You useless brat!" Richard bellowed, his voice filled with a disproportionate fury. "Can't you do the one thing you're good for? Look at you, waiting tables while I run an empire. You're a failure, and you'll never be anything more." The humiliation was like a punch to Lucas's gut. His face burned, the tray in his hand now trembling visibly. His relatives, the same people who had shared Christmases and birthdays with him, stared down at their plates, becoming silent accomplices to the cruelty. Lucas's world seemed to shrink, reduced to that single point of shame and powerlessness. It was in that moment of absolute silence that the double doors to the dining room swung open. An imposing and unexpected figure entered. Mr. Davies, the family's attorney for over 40 years, a man whose presence exuded respect and a quiet authority that not even Richard dared to challenge. His expression was grim, and his eyes swept over every face at the table before settling on the manufactured chaos. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner," the attorney said, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "but I have a duty to perform. As you all know, the patriarch of the family, Arthur, passed away exactly 1 year ago today, and he left very clear instructions for his final will and testament to be read on this date, at this very dinner." Richard, visibly annoyed by the interruption of his power play, snorted. Honestly, Davies, we already know what it says. I'm the heir. I run everything. Just get the formality over with so we can continue. Mr. Davies paid him no mind. He opened his leather briefcase, the same one that had accompanied all the family's major deals for decades, and from it he withdrew a large envelope of heavy paper, sealed with red wax. The sound of the paper tearing was the only noise in the paralyzed room, a fragile sound that seemed to carry the weight of a coming earthquake. The lawyer slowly unfolded the paper, the sound filling the deadly silence that had fallen over the room. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Lucas, who remained motionless, the tray still in his hands, his waiter's uniform suddenly looking like the attire of an unknown king. The shock was a wave that paralyzed every member of the Harrison family. Richard's face had undergone a grotesque metamorphosis. The crimson fury had given way to a deathly pallor. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He, the CEO, the self-proclaimed successor, the man who measured his worth in the digits in his bank account and the price of shares on the stock market, had just been reduced to nothing by his father's last wish. The fortune, the power, the empire he used as a weapon of humiliation, all of it had been torn from his grasp and handed to the target of his latest scorn. "This is absurd," Richard stammered, finally finding his voice. It was a hoarse whisper, devoid of its usual arrogance. A sick joke. My father wouldn't do this. He was ill, senile. Davies, you know that. Mr. Davies looked at him over his glasses, his expression impassive. Arthur was of perfectly sound mind, Richard, and he was very specific in his instructions. I have medical reports attesting to his lucidity until his final day. He anticipated you would contest this. Lucas felt the world spinning. The attorney's words echoed in his mind but made no sense. Heir? Him? The young man who counted coins for the bus? The Harrison Group, a behemoth of businesses, investments, and a net worth that rivaled that of small nations, was now his. It was a nightmare, a fever dream. He looked at his relatives. His aunt, Richard's wife, had her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. His cousins, who had previously looked at him with disdain, now stared with a mixture of fear and envy. They no longer saw the waiter. They saw the owner of their futures, the holder of their unlimited credit cards and their lives of luxury. The shift was instantaneous and nauseating. I don't understand," Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. It was the first thing he had said since Richard's outburst. Mr. Davies turned his attention to him, and for the first time that night, his stern gaze softened with a hint of compassion. "Arthur believed in you, Lucas. He saw in you the strength and integrity he considered to be our family's true assets. He believed that the greatest capital he could leave behind was not in investment funds or gold bars, but in the character of his successor." Richard let out a bitter, sharp laugh. "Character? He's handing the future of the company to a kid who doesn't even know what cash flow is, who can't tell a stock from a bond. He'll run it into the ground in 6 months. Your father thought of that as well," Mr. Davies continued, his firm voice cutting through Richard's hysteria. He adjusted the document in his hands, indicating that the reading was not yet over. The air grew even more tense, if that were possible. Everyone leaned forward, their hearts pounding in unison with the expectation of a new revelation. The lawyer paused dramatically, ensuring he had everyone's full attention, especially Lucas's, who looked as if he were about to faint. "The inheritance," Davies said, his voice resonating with the weight of the law and a powerful man's final will, "is yours, Lucas. Unquestionably yours. However, Arthur, in his wisdom, imposed a condition." The word condition hung in the air like a sentence. Richard raised his head, a glint of cruel hope in his eyes. A condition was a loophole, a chance to reverse this nightmare. Lucas, on the other hand, felt an unexpected relief. A condition meant there might be a way out, a way to refuse this monumental burden he had never wanted. He didn't want the fortune, the wealth, the businesses. He wanted his drafting table, the smell of paper and graphite, the satisfaction of creating something with his own hands, not with the sweat of others. He wanted a simple life, built on his own merit. "What condition?" Richard asked, his voice impatient, already imagining impossible performance clauses a novice could never meet. "Mr. Davies ignored him and spoke directly to Lucas. "Your grandfather didn't just want to give you control, Lucas. He wanted you to earn it and, more importantly, to be prepared for it. Therefore, the condition is as follows. You will assume the presidency of the Harrison conglomerate immediately. However, for the first year, all your strategic decisions must be approved by a board of trustees, appointed directly by your grandfather." The lawyer paused. "A board of which, Richard, you will also be a part. Your father was explicit. You will remain, as chief operating officer, subordinate to Lucas, to ensure a functional transition. He wanted you to witness the leadership he had hoped for." Richard's humiliation was complete. It wasn't enough to be disinherited. He would be forced to be both a tutor and a subordinate to the nephew he despised. It would be a daily torture, a constant reminder of his downfall. He sank into his chair, his body drained of all its arrogant energy. Lucas, however, felt the noose tighten. He was trapped. To refuse the inheritance now would mean dishonoring the last wish of his grandfather, the only family member who had always treated him with genuine affection. A memory flooded his mind, sharp and bittersweet. He was 10 years old in his grandfather's study, a place that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Arthur wasn't reviewing profit reports or stock quotes. He was teaching young Lucas how to play chess. "Don't focus on capturing your opponent's pieces, my boy," the old man had said, his voice gentle. "Focus on protecting your own, especially the most vulnerable ones. A king is nothing without his pawns." At that moment, Lucas understood his grandfather was never just talking about the game. "Who's on this board?" asked Beatrice, Richard's sister, her voice trembling. She had always been the gentler one in the family, a figure who floated between loyalty to her brother and a fond memory of her father. "There are 3 people," Mr. Davies replied, consulting his papers. "First, myself, as the legal guardian of the will. The second person is the chief financial officer your father hired 6 months before he passed, a capital markets expert with an impeccable reputation." He glanced at the paper again, and the shadow of a smile touched his lips. "And the third person, well, this is a choice that demonstrates the depth of Arthur's planning." He looked directly at Richard, who grew even paler, as if he knew what was coming. "The third member of the board that will guide Mr. Lucas," Davies announced, "is Ms. Helen Shaw." The name dropped like a bomb in the center of the table. Richard choked. Helen Shaw, the former head of human resources, a woman of unshakable integrity, whom Richard had publicly fired 5 years earlier, accusing her of being antiquated and an obstacle to progress, for fiercely defending the rights and benefits of the factory workers. She was the personification of everything he despised, empathy over profit. And now she was back, with power over him. The mention of Helen Shaw's name sent a wave of murmurs around the table. To the older generation, Helen was a legend at the company, the moral compass Arthur had always made sure to keep close. To Richard's generation, she was a fossil, a relic from an era when business still mixed with sentiment. Arthur's choice was a clear message, a posthumous checkmate to his son. He wasn't just giving Lucas control, he was surrounding him with the values he himself had cherished. Richard felt a bitter bile rise in his throat. He would be forced to sit in the same room as the woman he had humiliated, and worse, to answer to her. It was a perfect trap. As the family processed the shock, Lucas felt the weight of 1,000 atmospheres on his shoulders. He didn't know Helen Shaw personally, but the story of her dismissal was notorious. He felt like a pawn in a game far too complex for his understanding. The money, the fortune that now belonged to him, felt like a poison, infecting every relationship around him. His Aunt Beatrice looked at him with an unreadable expression, perhaps pity, perhaps a spark of hope. His cousin, who hours earlier had mocked his apron, now avoided his gaze at all costs. He was terribly alone in the center of this storm. The dinner ended abruptly. No one had an appetite. Mr. Davies arranged a brief meeting for the next day at the company headquarters, a place Lucas only knew from the outside. Leaving the restaurant, no longer as an employee, but as its new owner, felt surreal. He refused the driver that Richard, in an automatic and now hollow gesture, offered him. He took the night bus, as he always did, the contrast between his internal and external reality making everything even more absurd. In his small apartment, he sat in the dark, his head in his hands. He didn't want this power, this responsibility. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a sentence to a life that wasn't his. The next day, arriving at the imposing headquarters of the Harrison conglomerate, a glass and steel skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds, Lucas felt like an imposter. All eyes turned to him. The news, somehow, had already spread. He was led to the president's office, his grandfather's former sanctuary, which was now his. It was a vast space with a panoramic view of the city, decorated with a sober luxury. On the immense mahogany desk, there was an envelope with his name on it, written in his grandfather's elegant and familiar script. Mr. Davies, who was waiting for him, informed him that Arthur had left a few things for him. With trembling hands, Lucas opened the envelope. Inside, there were no instructions about business or finance. There was a single sheet of paper with a short, enigmatic message. True wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you protect. The beginning of everything lies at the root. Along with the note was a small brass key, old and ornate, the kind that opens secret drawers or music boxes. Lucas had no idea what it meant. He looked around the office, searching for something that might match the key. Nothing seemed obvious. His attention was drawn to the bookshelf that covered an entire wall. There were hundreds of leather-bound volumes, classics of literature, philosophy, and history. As his fingers traced the spines, he noticed one book that seemed out of place, a worn, vintage copy of The Little Prince. The book his grandfather used to read to him as a child. Moved by an impulse, he pulled the book out. Behind it, on the wall of the bookshelf, was a tiny keyhole he never would have noticed. Lucas's heart pounded. The key. The brass key slid smoothly into the hidden lock. With a discreet click, a small section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing not a safe full of gold or documents about secret investments, but a velvet-lined compartment. Inside was a stack of leather-bound journals, tied with a silk ribbon. They were his grandfather's diaries. Lucas sat down in the presidential chair that was now his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt he was about to invade the soul of the man he so admired, but the note encouraged him. This was for him. He opened the first journal, dated 10 years ago. Arthur's handwriting was firm, recording not just the ups and downs of the stock market or business expansions, but his most private thoughts. Lucas began to read, and with each page, a new image of his grandfather formed, far more complex and melancholic than he had imagined. Arthur wrote about his growing disappointment with Richard. He sees the empire as a money-making machine, one entry read. He talks of profit, dividends, interest, but he has forgotten that our business is made of people. He confuses the company's net worth with the worth of his own soul. Lucas flipped through the years, the pages witnessing Richard's transformation from an ambitious businessman into a petty tyrant, driven by vanity and greed. Arthur described with pain how his son pushed away loyal employees, made risky decisions aimed only at short-term gain, and treated the less fortunate with contempt. Today, I saw Richard humiliate a driver for a trivial mistake, Arthur wrote once. In that moment I did not see my son. I saw a stranger, a man poor in spirit, despite all his wealth. But amid the pages of disappointment, there was light. Lucas found his own name mentioned with surprising frequency. His grandfather recorded his small victories, a high grade in school, an award at a science fair, the kindness he showed to his elders. He wrote about the conversations they had, about Lucas's dreams of becoming an architect. Lucas has his mother's sensitivity and the resilience of our name. Read a passage that brought tears to Lucas's eyes. He doesn't yearn for power or fortune. He yearns to build. He understands, without my having to say it, that a true legacy isn't an empire of assets, but a foundation of values. He finally understood. The will was not an impulsive act of a senile old man. It was a carefully considered decision, the culmination of years of silent observation. His grandfather wasn't punishing him with this responsibility. He was entrusting him with his soul, his true treasure. That knowledge gave Lucas a strength he didn't know he possessed. Fear began to give way to a sense of purpose. He wouldn't do this for himself, but for the memory of the man who believed in him when no one else did. He picked up the last journal, with entries right up to the week of his grandfather's death. The handwriting was shakier, but the clarity of thought was unwavering. On the final page, there was one last note, almost a posthumous reflection. I leave my empire in my grandson's hands. I know Richard and others will try to bring him down. They will use the money and influence they still possess. But I have left a protection for the boy, a final trump card that no one knows about. It is tied to our roots, to the very first shares that founded this company. May God guide him. A final trump card. The first shares. Lucas frowned, trying to decipher the riddle. Before he could think further, the office door opened and Mr. Davies entered, accompanied by a woman with graying hair, impeccable posture, and a gaze that conveyed formidable intelligence and serenity. Lucas, the attorney said, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Helen Shaw. Helen Shaw extended her hand to Lucas, a restrained yet genuine smile on her lips. Her handshake was firm, conveying a quiet confidence that immediately calmed some of Lucas's roiling nerves. Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice calm and professional, it's an honor. Your grandfather was a great man. Please, call me Lucas, he replied, feeling like a boy in the presence of these two pillars of experience. The honor is all mine, Ms. Shaw. The first meeting of the Board of Trustees was less intimidating than Lucas had expected. Richard was there, of course, his face a mask of contained resentment. He arrived late, a petty power play that impressed no one. During the meeting, he tried to bombard Lucas with an avalanche of corporate jargon. He spoke of the need to optimize cash flow, the volatility of certain stocks in the company's investment portfolio, and the declining profitability of one of the subsidiaries. They were terms he knew Lucas wouldn't understand, a clear attempt to expose his ignorance and reassert his own indispensability. To his surprise, and to Richard's poorly disguised fury, Helen acted as both a translator and a shield. With impressive patience, she broke down each concept for Lucas. What your uncle means by optimizing cash flow, Lucas, is that he's suggesting we lay off 200 employees from the factory upstate to cut costs, she explained, her voice neutral, but her gaze fixed on Richard. And when he talks about declining profitability, he neglects to mention it was caused by a high-risk crypto investment that he himself approved, against your father's advice. Every attempt by Richard to corner Lucas was disarmed by Helen's clarity and deep knowledge. Mr. Davies intervened only to clarify legal points, but it was clear the battlefield was set. It was Richard's worldview against Helen's, and Lucas was the territory they were fighting over. At the end of the meeting, it was time for Lucas to make his first decision. It was something relatively small, renewing the contract with the landscaping company that maintained the headquarters grounds. Richard presented a proposal from a new, much cheaper vendor. A 30% savings on the budget. Simple as that, he said with a superior smirk. Helen, however, added vital context. The current company has been with us for 30 years, Lucas. They were hired by your grandfather. All their employees have health insurance and benefits paid by us as part of the agreement. The new company your uncle suggests is known for using non-union gig-based labor with no job security. Lucas looked from Richard to Helen. In his mind, he heard his grandfather's voice about protecting the most vulnerable pieces. The decision, which was supposed to be about money, became about people. "We're keeping the current contract," Lucas said, his voice firmer than he felt. "And what's more, I want the finance department to review the contracts of all our vendors to ensure they follow fair labor practices. The savings we're looking for can't come from sacrificing someone's dignity." The silence in the room was heavy. Helen gave him an almost imperceptible nod, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. Mr. Davies remained impassive, but Lucas noticed a relaxing of his posture. Richard, however, turned red with rage. He stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "This is ridiculous. Is this how you're going to manage my assets?" "By throwing money away on sentimentality," he snarled, momentarily forgetting the assets were no longer his. "Well, know this, my father was not of sound mind. I will use every cent of my personal wealth, every dollar I have, to hire the best lawyers in this country and prove it. I will nullify this will and take this company from your incompetent hands. I swear it." Richard's threat was not an empty one. The following week, the Harrison Group was officially served with a lawsuit contesting Arthur's will. The news leaked to the financial press, and the company's stock took a slight dip. The family name, once synonymous with stability and power, was now associated with a sordid internal dispute. Richard, using his considerable personal fortune, hired a law firm known for its aggression and ruthless tactics. The strategy was clear: paint Arthur as a senile old man and Lucas as an incompetent opportunist, dragging the process out long enough to destabilize Lucas's leadership and force a settlement. The family split publicly. Some uncles and cousins, fearing Lucas's sentimental management, would dry up their dividend stream, backed Richard. Others, older ones who remembered Arthur's integrity, remained in a cautious silence. Lucas found himself isolated, the weight of the legal battle adding to the pressure of learning to run a multi-billion-dollar empire. Helen and Mr. Davies were his only allies, guiding him through the labyrinth of depositions, motions, and preliminary hearings. The turning point came during the deposition of a key witness, called by Richard's lawyers, Arthur's personal physician. They expected the doctor, who had been on Richard's payroll for years, to testify about the patriarch's supposed mental decline. However, under Mr. Davies's precise cross-examination, the doctor was forced to admit, under oath, that Arthur Harrison had maintained extraordinary mental clarity to the end, even discussing complex scientific articles in his last consultation. The first crack in Richard's armor appeared, but the real earthquake happened unexpectedly, during a family meeting convened by Richard to try and consolidate support. The tension was unbearable. He was lecturing on how Lucas was jeopardizing everyone's inheritance with his childish ideas. It was then that Beatrice, his sister, who had remained silent until then, stood up. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Enough, Richard," she said, the word echoing in the quiet room. Everyone turned to her, shocked. Beatrice never confronted anyone. "You talk about Dad's legacy, about the fortune he built. But have you forgotten how he built it? Have you forgotten his values?" "Beatrice, don't start with that speech," he tried to interrupt. "No," she cut him off, her voice louder. "I'm going to speak. I've been quiet for too long, out of loyalty to you, out of fear of rocking the boat. But what's rocking the boat is your greed. Dad knew what he was doing, and I know why." She took a deep breath, tears finally streaming down her face. I am supporting Dad's decision. I'm supporting Lucas." A gasp went through the room. The betrayal from his own sister was a devastating blow to Richard's image. "Are you insane?" he shouted. "You're siding with this waiter." "He's my nephew," she shot back, her voice thick with emotion. "And he has more of Dad's character in his little finger than you have in your whole body. And you know how I know? Because I've kept a secret of yours for 15 years. A secret Dad made me promise I'd never tell to protect the family name." She paused, looking at every shocked face in the room. "It's time for the truth to come out. You all remember the 2008 crisis, when the company almost went under. Everyone thought it was the global meltdown, but it wasn't. It was a disaster caused by a secret, reckless investment in high-risk derivatives made behind Dad's back. A deal that cost us nearly a third of our capital. A deal made by you, Richard." The silence that followed Beatrice's revelation was more deafening than any shout. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Richard, who had built his image as a business genius, the savior who had modernized the company, was exposed as the architect of its near collapse. His face lost all color. He tried to stammer a denial, but his sister's look, a mixture of pain and determination, silenced him. In that moment, everyone in the room understood the depth of Arthur's wisdom. The decision to disinherit Richard had not been a whim, but a protective measure, the final act of a father trying to save his legacy from his own son's recklessness. The news spread like wildfire through the family. The alliance around Richard disintegrated. His wife stared at him with an expression of shock and betrayal, realizing the foundation of her luxurious life was far more fragile than she had imagined. The legal and familial support he had assembled crumbled in a matter of hours. The lawsuit, now devoid of any moral credibility, became an embarrassment. Lucas watched it all with a sense of sorrow. There was no triumph in his victory, only the melancholy of seeing his family tear itself apart. The revelation brought him no joy, but a deeper understanding of the burden his grandfather had carried in silence for so many years. He felt closer than ever to the old patriarch. In the weeks that followed, Lucas threw himself into his work. With the legal battle effectively won, he could focus on learning to be the leader his grandfather had hoped for. He spent hours with Helen, who patiently taught him the fundamentals of business, explaining the difference between assets and liabilities, the importance of a well-managed treasury, and the strategies behind the company's major investments. He read his grandfather's journals every night, seeking guidance in his words. During one of these study sessions with Mr. Davies, while reviewing Arthur's personal finances, Lucas came across a series of recurring monthly transfers to an account that didn't belong to any vendor or family member. They were significant sums, coming directly from his grandfather's personal income. "What's this?" Lucas asked, pointing to the transactions. Mr. Davies smiled, a genuine smile of affection and respect. "That, Lucas, was your grandfather's true heart. That was the Seeds of Tomorrow Foundation, something he ran completely anonymously." Intrigued, Lucas asked for more details. The attorney explained that Arthur had created a secret philanthropic foundation. Using his own funds, not company money, he financed scholarships for employees' children, paid for costly medical treatments for employees and their families, and supported small community projects in the towns where his factories were located. It was a quiet system of altruism, a direct pipeline from his fortune to those who helped build it. "Did Richard know about this?" Lucas asked, his heart aching. He knew of the account's existence, but considered it his father's sentimental expense. After Arthur passed, since there was no legal obligation, the transfers simply stopped, the attorney replied. Lucas was silent for a long time, staring at the numbers on the spreadsheet. This was more than simple philanthropy. It was his grandfather's philosophy in action, the proof that he truly believed his greatest assets were his people. In that moment, A clear and powerful idea began to form in his mind. He knew what his first major project as president would be. He wouldn't just reactivate the foundation, he would make it the central pillar of his leadership. Lucas's decision to reactivate and expand the Seeds of Tomorrow Foundation was met with mixed reactions. For the older employees and for Helen, it was a sign that Arthur's spirit was truly back in charge. For the executives aligned with Richard and for the family members focused on financial results, it was confirmation of their worst fears. Lucas was an idealist who would squander the company's assets on charity projects. Richard, now a marginalized figure but still present at meetings, openly mocked the initiative, calling it an inefficient way to burn capital that could be invested to generate real profits. Lucas, however, held firm. He didn't see the foundation as an expense, but as an investment in the company's most valuable asset, its community. He traveled to the towns where the conglomerate operated, not to inspect balance sheets, but to talk to the people. He sat in the kitchens of factory workers, listened to their stories, their dreams for their children, their health concerns. He saw firsthand the impact his grandfather's quiet generosity had had, and the void its absence had left. This journey transformed him. The shy, insecure young man who had been waiting tables weeks before was giving way to a confident, empathetic leader. He didn't have Richard's technical knowledge, but he possessed something his uncle never would: the ability to connect with people on a human level. His plan for the foundation was ambitious. He wanted to create job training programs, build daycare centers for working mothers, and offer university scholarships, not just to the top students, but to those who showed passion and resilience. To fund this, he proposed something radical: allocating a fixed percentage of the company's annual dividends directly to the foundation. The idea was received as heresy on the board of directors. "This will impact our share price," one director argued. "The shareholders will never approve. They invest for maximum return, not to bankroll social projects." Richard saw his chance to counterattack. Though his family reputation was in tatters, he was still a known name on Wall Street. He began contacting minority shareholders, poisoning them against Lucas. He presented the company's new philosophy as a financial risk, an amateurish management style that would sacrifice growth for philanthropy. He argued that if he could get enough votes, he could invoke a little-known clause in the company's bylaws that allowed shareholders to call an extraordinary meeting to remove a president whose management was deemed detrimental to the financial interests of the business. The battle for the company's soul was on. It was no longer a family feud, but a clash of worldviews. On one side, the traditional pursuit of profit at all costs. On the other, a new model of conscious capitalism, where success was measured not just in dollars, but in the well-being of the community. Lucas knew that to win, he would need more than good intentions. He would need to convince skeptical investors that his path was not only the right one, but also the smartest one in the long run. The date for the shareholders' meeting was set, and the fate of the entire Harrison empire would hang on a vote. Richard was confident. He knew the money game, and he knew that, in the end, greed always spoke loudest. The looming shareholders' meeting turned the company headquarters into a strategic war room. Richard moved with the dexterity of a wounded predator, using his network to undermine Lucas's position. He hosted dinners with investment fund managers, presenting spreadsheets and projections that showed how Lucas's populist policies would diminish shareholder returns. He spoke the language the market understood. Interest rates, ROI, stock valuation, every word was calculated to paint Lucas as a dangerous dreamer, a risk to everyone's portfolio. Lucas, on the other hand, felt like a fish out of water. The world of high finance was a foreign language to him. He spent sleepless nights studying with Helen, She taught him about market expectations, how to communicate a long-term vision to investors focused on the next quarter. He learned about his grandfather's businesses, discovering that Arthur, despite his humanist values, was also a shrewd investor with a diverse portfolio ranging from real estate to cautious stakes in new technologies like early cryptocurrencies. His grandfather understood money, but he never let it be his master. Amid this pressure, Lucas found a refuge in his conversations with his aunt Beatrice. She had become his greatest confidant within the family. She shared stories of her father, anecdotes that revealed the man behind the billionaire. "And Dad always said money is like water," she told him once. "If it sits still, it stagnates. It needs to flow to create life." These conversations strengthened Lucas's conviction. He wasn't just defending a business plan, he was honoring a life philosophy. The vote tally was grim. Richard had secured the support of a significant block of institutional shareholders. The family vote was split. Lucas had Beatrice and some older relatives, but Richard still commanded the loyalty of those who depended on his favor. The balance was dangerously poised. According to Mr. Davies's calculations, the final decision would come down to a single shareholder, someone who held 5% of the company's stock, a stake valuable enough to tip the scales. The problem was, no one knew who this person was. The record showed only the name of a holding company, a shell corporation based in a tax haven. The shares had been acquired decades ago, and since then, the owner had remained a mystery. The shareholder had never attended a meeting, always voting by proxy, usually aligning with Arthur's proposals. It was a ghost in the system, a wild card that could decide everyone's future. Richard Dussey, with his unlimited resources, hired a team of private investigators to uncover the identity of the mystery shareholder. He was determined to find and persuade or buy. That deciding vote, Lucas Siu, without the same resources, felt a pang of desperation. How could he fight his uncle's power and influence? It was then that Helen, reviewing old files in the company's archives, found a clue. An old piece of correspondence between Arthur and the holding company, addressed not to an office, but to a person, a name, Amelia Warren. A name that meant nothing to Lucas, but which made Helen's eyes widen in recognition. She remembered the stories. Amelia wasn't just any investor. She was Arthur's first partner, the woman who helped him found his first small workshop long before the empire, the money, and the fortune. The discovery of Amelia Warren's name was like finding a map to a lost treasure. While Richard wasted time and money chasing a phantom corporation, Lucas and Helen followed a trail of memories and dusty records. They found that Amelia had sold most of her stake in the company to Arthur decades ago when the business began to grow exponentially, saying she preferred a simpler life. However, the records showed that Arthur, instead of buying all the shares, had insisted she keep a small but significant percentage as a permanent reminder of where it all began. Locating her wasn't easy. She had retired from public life, living in a small house in the mountains. Far from the noise and ambition of the corporate world, Lucas decided he had to go there himself, not as the CEO of the Harrison Group seeking a vote, but as Arthur's grandson seeking answers. He went alone, driving for hours on winding roads until he found the property, a modest but well-kept home with an orchard and a garden. He found Amelia, a woman with white hair and incredibly lucid eyes, tending her rose bushes. She greeted him with a polite wariness that melted when he introduced himself as Arthur's grandson. She invited him in, and they spent the afternoon talking on her porch, drinking fresh brewed coffee. Lucas didn't talk about the shareholders, meeting, the stock, or the fight with Richard. Instead, he asked about his grandfather, about what he was like before he became a multi-billionaire. Amelia smiled, her gaze lost in memories. She spoke of a young Arthur. "I'm full of dreams, but also fears." She told him how they had worked side by side, fixing machines and negotiating with suppliers. Arthur never wanted to be the richest man in the graveyard, she said. He wanted to build something that would last, something that would give people security. The money was a consequence, never the goal. She told Lucas about a promise they made to each other when they sold their first big order, that no matter how big they got, they would never forget the people who helped them get there. Lucas felt a deep connection to this woman and the story she told. It was the confirmation of everything he had read in his grandfather's journals. Finally, it was Amelia who brought it up. "I know why you're here, son. News travels, even up in the mountains. I know about the fight for the company." She looked at him, her gaze penetrating. "Your uncle found me, too. His men were here yesterday. They offered me a staggering amount for my shares, enough money to buy this entire mountain." Lucas's heart sank. He had no way to compete with an offer like that. "I didn't sell, of course," she continued, as if reading his thoughts. "These shares aren't an investment for me. They're a pact. And that brings me to the final trump card Arthur mentioned to you. I imagine you found that reference in his journals." Lucas nodded, surprised. It's not a legal document or a secret clause. The final trump card is Wesu, the old friends, the people who knew his essence. The trump card is memory. Arthur knew Richard would try to use power and money to get what he wanted. But he trusted that you would use something stronger, the truth of his character. She leaned forward, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Arthur made me promise that if there were ever a dispute over the company's future, I would use my vote to support not the smartest or the richest, but the one who best represented the reason we started all this. So my vote, Lucas, will not be decided by profit spreadsheets, but by who you prove yourself to be at the meeting tomorrow." The ballroom where the shareholders' meeting was held was charged with an almost palpable electricity. On one side sat the suited executives and fund managers aligned with Richard, their expressions serious and calculating. On the other, a more diverse group, Beatrice and some family members, old employees who had bought shares over the years, and a few small investors who believed in Lucas's new vision. The air conditioning hummed, but the emotional temperature in the room was scorching. Lucas, seated at the main table beside Helen and Mr. Davies, felt the weight of every gaze. His heart was racing, a mix of fear and resolve. Richard spoke first. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned the stage. Using a projector, he delivered a flawless presentation, filled with upward trending graphs and optimistic projections. He spoke of maximizing shareholder return, of cutting unnecessary costs, a euphemism for the foundation projects and employee benefits, and promised a substantial dividend increase in the next quarter. He painted a picture where the only measure of success was numbers, profits, the stock price. His performance was polished, persuasive, and utterly soulless. He was selling a future of wealth, and many in the room seemed eager to buy. Then it was Lucas's turn. He stood and walked to the podium, carrying no notes, no slides. His palms were sweating. He looked out at the audience, seeing not a mass of shareholders but individuals, families, people whose lives were impacted by the decisions made in that room. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength with every word. He didn't talk about cash flow or profitability. He talked about his grandfather. He told the story of how Arthur had founded the company with a partner, Amelia, and a promise. He talked about the journals, about his grandfather's pain at seeing the company stray from its original purpose. He spoke of the Seeds of Tomorrow Foundation, not as an expense, but as the company's soul, the engine that drove loyalty, innovation, and sustainable growth based on people and not just capital. He didn't promise record profits in the next quarter. Instead, he promised to build a company they could all be proud of, a legacy their children and grandchildren would admire, not for its wealth, but for its integrity. When he finished, A deep silence fell over the room. There was no immediate applause, just a moment of collective reflection. Richard smirked, certain that his nephew's sentimental speech was no match for his financial logic. The time came to vote. The blocks of shares were tallied, and as predicted, the result was dangerously close. Finally, the meeting chairman announced, "We now invite the representative of the Warren and Harrison Holding Company to cast their vote." All heads turned to the large screen where Amelia Warren's video call would be broadcast. Her image appeared, sharp and serene. The simplicity of her mountain home, a stark contrast to the corporate luxury of the ballroom. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Before I cast my vote, I'd like to tell you a short story about Arthur. Once, early on, a major client went bankrupt and failed to pay us. We were on the verge of ruin. We had enough money to pay either our suppliers or our few employees, but not both. I told Arthur to pay the suppliers so we could stay in business. He refused. He said, 'Machines and materials we can buy again. The trust of the people who work with us, we can never buy back.' He paid every last cent of the wages, even though it meant we both went without a paycheck for months." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room through the camera. This company was built on that choice. And today, you are all making the same choice. The echo of Amelia's story was still resonating in the silent room when she delivered her decision. "Based on the promise I made to my friend Arthur 50 years ago, and on the vision that was presented here today, I cast my vote with Lucas Harrison." The words were a velvet hammer. The result was proclaimed. By a narrow but decisive margin, the motion to oust Lucas was defeated, and his proposal to fund the foundation with dividends was approved. A murmur of relief and some discreet applause erupted from Lucas's side. On Richard's side, disbelief gave way to a cold, silent defeat. He didn't explode in fury. He simply sat there, his body slumped like a balloon that had been suddenly deflated. His entire strategy, based on the premise that money always wins, had shattered against the strength of an old promise. He hadn't been defeated by his nephew, but by the ghost of his father's values. In the chaos that followed as people rose and talked, Lucas walked to the other side of the room. He stopped in front of Richard. His uncle didn't look up. "Congratulations," he muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "You win." "This wasn't about winning or losing, Uncle," Lucas said quietly. He no longer felt anger, only a deep sadness for the journey that had brought them here. In the following days, the transition became final. Richard, expecting to be fired publicly, was surprised by the offer Lucas made him in a private meeting, with only Mr. Davies present. Lucas gave him a choice. The first option was a generous severance package, a fortune that would allow him to live the rest of his life in luxury, but completely cut off from the family business. The second option was radically different, a non-executive role, with no decision-making power on the board of the New Seeds of Tomorrow Foundation. He wouldn't draw an exorbitant salary, but he would have the chance to travel, see the projects, witness the impact of the foundation's work, and perhaps reconnect with the human side of business he had forgotten. "Why?" Richard asked, genuinely confused. "After everything I did, why give me a choice?" "Because it's what Grandpa would have done," Lucas replied. "But he never gave up on you. He just took away your power to hurt others and yourself. He always believed in redemption." Richard didn't answer immediately. He asked for time to think, a show of humility no one had ever expected from him. The family, led by Beatrice's diplomacy, began a slow and painful healing process. The conversations were no longer about money or power, but about forgiveness and rebuilding. Months passed. Lucas, with Helen's guidance, blossomed in his new role. He found a way to merge his two passions. He began using his architectural knowledge to personally design the community centers and daycares funded by the foundation. He was no longer just an heir. He was a builder, just as he had always dreamed. One afternoon, he was in his office, his grandfather's old office, looking out the window at the city stretching below. He felt a peace he had never imagined possible. Mr. Davies entered quietly and placed one last envelope on the desk. The handwriting was, unmistakably, Arthur's. "Your grandfather instructed me to give you this only when I felt you were no longer an heir, but the leader he knew you could be," the lawyer said. "I believe that day has come." With a pounding heart, Lucas took the envelope. The paper was thick and high quality, but it felt infinitely more personal than any corporate document. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet. It wasn't an addendum to the will, nor a last-minute business instruction. It was a letter written by his grandfather in his final days. "My dearest grandson," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found your way. It means Mr. Davies, and more importantly, you yourself, believe you have become the man I always knew was in there. Forgive me for the burden I placed on your shoulders. I know you never wanted this life of business, this fortune that can be both a blessing and a curse." Lucas felt his eyes burn. It was as if his grandfather were right there, speaking to him. "I saw what the relentless pursuit of more money did to your uncle," the letter continued. "It turned a good boy into a bitter, lonely man. My greatest fear was that the empire I built to give my family security would end up destroying its soul. And then I looked at you. I saw your kindness, your resilience, your refusal to be broken by humiliation. I saw you working as a waiter to pay for your education with a dignity that is worth more than all the gold in the world. In that moment, I knew. The true Harrison family asset was not in the stocks, the buildings, or the investment funds. It was in you. I did not leave you my wealth so that you could become me. I left it so you would have the freedom to fully become yourself. If you want to be an architect, use these resources to build things that help people. If you want to be a leader, lead with compassion. The money is not the destination, Lucas. It is just the fuel. You are the pilot. The greatest inheritance I can give you is not the billions, but the chance to define your own legacy. Be happy, my boy, and be good. That's all an old man can ask. With all my love, your grandfather, Arthur. Lucas folded the letter slowly, tears streaming freely down his face. They were not tears of sorrow, but of profound gratitude and release. The weight of responsibility hadn't vanished, but it was now supported by a foundation of love and purpose. A year later, the annual Harrison family dinner was held again. This time, it wasn't in a lavish restaurant, but in Lucas's spacious yet modest apartment, which he insisted on keeping. The air didn't smell of sophisticated dishes with French names, but of home-cooked food, prepared by him and his Aunt Beatrice. The atmosphere wasn't one of tension and forced smiles, but of genuine conversation and easy laughter. Most of the family was there, even Richard. He had accepted the position with the foundation. He had spent the last few months traveling the country, visiting the projects he once scorned. Something in him had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility and a tired gaze that was, perhaps for the first time in years, at peace. He and Lucas were not yet friends, but there was a mutual, silent respect, the beginning of a bridge across an abyss of pain. Lucas raised his glass, not of an expensive vintage, but of a good bottle of California wine. "To our family," he said, looking at each face around the table, "to a new beginning." Everyone raised their glasses and toasted. In that moment, Lucas Harrison, the former waiter, the unexpected heir, realized he had finally fulfilled his grandfather's last wish. He hadn't just saved a business empire, he had rescued the most precious asset of all, his family.